All right, everybody. Aloha Friday. Happy New Year. This is the first Aloha Friday since last year, and I am excited to have Dr. Tony Warner with me as we're speaking about the reality of the pursuit of success. And I couldn't have a better person to speak about this. We were just chatting not long ago about how we endeavor on these things as a professional. So, Aloha Friday, everybody. Welcome back to our sessions where we highlight wonderful professionals around our state and world. Today, Dr. Tony's with me. Thank you for being my first guest of the year and welcoming Aloha Friday Live.
I didn't even know I was going to be your first guest of the year. So now I'm
Special.
extra excited. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And we were chatting not so far in the past about certain things. And I'm sure that the folks that are following here, I'm going to suggest follow you so they can get a hold of that wonderful content that you're creating this year. But before we get in it, for those that don't know you and are seeing you for the first time on our show, tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll get into this topic that really does need to be discussed.
Well, I am Tony, and I'm a mom of four. Currently pregnant with my fifth. Little guy's going to be due in a couple months, so we're very excited. Which is so funny because the first time I was on your show, Enrique, I had just had my fourth. It was right after I had her, so it's interesting how this timeline is working out. I also am an author, so you can see the Reset High Achievers Guide to Freedom and Fulfillment behind me. It's a bestseller, and you can find that on Amazon. And I am a psychotherapist. I really like to work with interpersonal relationship challenges, trauma work, and trauma. I could talk a lot about trauma, but trauma is beyond just what we often think is trauma. Maybe that'll even come up, in our conversation today around success, because it can affect how we define success and how we pursue it. And then I'm also a success mentor. So I get to support other professionals and parents that are out there that often are high achievers and want to be able to do well and be well and enjoy their relationships well in their life. So that's a snippet.
Absolutely. Hey, it's wonderful to hear all that. And oh, by the way, yes, we will be speaking about trauma because as and I'll use myself as the subject today, so it'll be very tangible, very real, in terms of how trauma and success have a relationship. Most of the time, it's a poor one; it's not a good one, but sometimes it does aid in propelling you, pushing you forward in a direction. You will still have to deal with it, right? You still have to deal with it, but sometimes that's the case. But Dr. Tony, before we get onto the trauma side, success is often defined by many definitions around the world. Usually, it boils down to what is success to you, right? And typically, we try to steer folks into that so that they may understand that it's not a cookie cutter type of deal when you're talking about success. It really does involve you mostly, but sometimes I feel that that is a cop out definition because there is a recipe for success. You just have to know what that looks like for you, right? Like I cook pasteles and for Christmas. It's a Puerto Rican dish. There's very many variations for it, but there's a recipe that I follow. And sometimes it doesn't taste good to some people, and that's just it. You have to find what that recipe is for you, and even sometimes adjust. Some people don't like too much salt. Some people don't like pepper in their stuff. So when we're trying to define success, let's start there. Trying to define success. What would you suggest?
Well, I want to speak to your recipe piece real fast before we hop into that definition, because I do think there's foundational components, right? Like with anything. So if we think about anything in life that we want to further develop, there's a foundation of the elements, or in a recipe example, the ingredients, right, that are needed. However, the delivery is different. The way it even affects each of us is different. And so I, in this online world where there's a lot of do this and don't do this and do this and don't do this, and then you'll feel successful, or then you'll be successful, or this is how you achieve success, I caution around that, because even though some of the ingredients or some of the foundational elements may be sprinkled in there, the way in which you integrate them in your life and the way they look is going to be different, not even just person to person, but season to season in our lives, if that makes sense, right?
Oh, yeah.
So right now, like I said, I'm pregnant with my fifth. My oldest is a teenager. And so the way I navigate being a parent and a therapist and a wife, and the way I navigate showing up in my roles now in my life, it is different than even just 3 years ago. The foundational elements are still important, integral parts of the foundation, but the way that they interweave in my life, the way that I incorporate them, it's changed. And if I do not allow it to change, if I get too rigid, which I've done before, I feel it. And it doesn't work, because we're not supposed to be stagnant and stuck in life. We're supposed to be able to be flexible. So when we think of success, I think a lot of times we think of the measurable success, and we define success based on what we can measure. I achieved this, I received this award, X, Y, or Z, these outward measurements of success. And so my challenge to all of us and to myself is to ask ourselves, does that really work? That can be an external definition of success, but do you actually feel successful when you pursue that? And largely the answer is no. It's no, because it's so external that you have to keep reaching external milestones or goals, or creating external things in order to push yourself, and it's never enough. It's never enough. So I've redefined my definition of success, and I believe it will probably always be evolving. But currently, the way that I define success for myself, I check in with myself. I'm like, am I feeling successful? Is in this moment, can I say that I'm living a life well lived? Just in this moment. Because I'm not going to look at my whole entire life and try to decide I was or wasn't successful, because it's too much.
Right.
It's too much. Right? So in this moment, breathe. Can I honestly answer that right now? I'm doing the best I can to live a life well lived. That question is so grounding to me.
Oh, yes.
And it helps me check in. Do I feel successful right now with how I'm showing up in the life I'm living, or do I not?
Yeah, that's so intriguing. We look at success as a culmination of something versus trying to bring that down to bite-sized moments, right? Just like you say, am I being successful right now? How am I presenting myself in this world at this moment? And that is grounding. My wife and I was having a discussion she's reading a book about near-death experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you, if you've never read a book that is sobering, life sobering, read something like that, because I just love her discussions about after post reading. But one question that comes up a lot in that whole book is the question that a lot of them get when they go through this experience, and it is one from God that says, what did you do with the life that I gave you?
Hmm.
And look, my hair stand up because, at the end of it all, and we're talking here about success, at the end of it all, what did you do with the opportunities of and for success when you had them?
Mhm.
Because it is those moments, those micro little dots in the whole line of our life that we can actually adjust. Sometimes that reflective moment, that's all we need to say, you know what? No, I'm not. If I'm honest with myself, and I guess that's a key to it all as well. You you have to be honest with yourself and say, you know what? At this very moment, no, I'm 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 not doing everything that I could to be successful as I've defined it, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh, it's just so complex because I think even with that, someone can get caught up if they haven't taken the time to be clear on what their definition of success is. They could get caught up, they could get lost in that inquiry, right? In that self inquiry you were just encouraging. And yet we do need that self inquiry. We need that self reflection. I don't think a lot of people slow down enough. Slowing down, especially if you're an achiever like myself, slowing down has can sometimes have like a negative connotation. We've got to heal that, okay? But slowing down enough to ask deeply, how do I want to define success for me, for my life, for my relationships? The financial success, the career success based on these, outward measurements, there's nothing wrong or bad about that, but it will not leave you feeling free and fulfilled in life, which means you will not feel that success inwardly. But you don't really know that unless you slow down enough to ask yourself this over a series of questions and over a series of time. I don't think it's enough even to just sit down and ask yourself this once. It's an ongoing conversation it's an ongoing conversation I've been having with myself for years. And I'm continually trying to evolve it to absorb, to learn more so that I can grow my definition in a way that best supports and serves me so I can be the me that I want to be in this world more and more often. We're all going to fall short sometimes.
Right. And I just had written this in there. Defining success is a deep exploration. And as you just put it, it's a continual exploration so that we can be timely. Now, in leadership, one of the greatest questions that we have as leaders is, am I relevant? Am I
Mm,
relevant to today? Because what I have often assessed when I work with folks and when I work with companies is that relevancy has been lost in
mm,
leadership, meaning they are trying to address a now workforce with a then application of leadership.
mm,
And you have to be careful not to lose foundational truths, right? You there are some things in leadership that are pillars, may never change, but the application will change. The way you apply certain truths that are maybe foundational may not be right for the time that you're living in. So in leadership, it's often encouraged to assess yourself and see if you are still relevant. Because the
Mm,
moment that you cease to be relevant, it doesn't matter how many PhDs you got, you cannot speak to the people of today. And so you have to adjust rightly, right? Not just because the masses are asking for it, because they may be asking for the wrong thing, but adjust accordingly to what is needed from leadership at this time. And then success, is it timely? Is it this? You mentioned seasons, and I love that you mentioned that because we do live a seasonal, timeline in life. Yeah, it's not always going to be summer and spring and flowers and butterflies. No, some days are going to be downright cold and downright dark early, right? One of the things that I don't like about winter is like 5 o'clock, and I'm like, where the sun go? I'm in Florida. What's going on? So, how do you feel about? And then let's talk about season, because season is a very a powerful thing, not only in normal life, right? And we feel the effects, right? I start seeing cold and gloomy days. I'm like, I don't like this. I'm already
mm,
in a I don't like this, and so some of those things happen to us during our life, right? We have deaths in the family, we have
yeah.
loss of employment, we have financial strains, marital strains, relationship strains. So, how do we navigate those seasons, especially as we are looking at pursuing success?
What I have found to be really helpful is to embrace both and off, and I'll explain what I mean by that. But most often, a leader who is feeling pressured to do right or be everything, get everything done, fix everything, know everything, all these things, is going to go into all or nothing kind of thinking, rigid thinking. And that is a human reaction, but it's not a very helpful one when it comes to wanting to get creative. And we need to be able to get creative in the role of leadership. So that allows us to adjust with the seasons. It allows us to bring our thinking, bring on our prefrontal cortex, which is our rational thinking part of our brain, helps us bring that on so we can think more clearly. We can get these creative juices flowing, all of which we need if we are to embrace the ebbs and the flows and the flexibility and the seasons that come with life in general. So I want us to just be aware of that. In order to embrace both of those day to day, I think that we need to remember that we need both structure and flow. So if you think of like a cup, if I want water and I don't have a cup and I just pour the water into the air, it's going to make a mess. There's no container to help it be where it needs to be, to give it boundaries. But because I poured my water in a cup, it has boundaries. It's not going to make a mess all over, but the kind of cup I pour it in is going to allow me to pour more, pour less. Maybe it's a tall cup, maybe it's a fat cup, whatever. So we need to embrace having boundaries, having structure in our day-to-day life as leaders and any other role we're in, as well as allowing of the flow inside of that structure. And a simple way to do that I do that is through an intentional scheduler. So I didn't like the ones that were out there, so I made my own, right? So it's on my desk at all times. So here is the structure that I outlined for myself. And I ask, today I choose to focus on experiencing my top 3 priorities, my top 3 values. How do I want to experience this portion of the day? So these are all structures, but within the structure, I choose the flow. I choose, what am I going to focus on? How do I want to experience this? And we need both. We can't have too much flow without any structure, and we can't have all rigid structure without flow. That's going to allow us to move through the seasons of life, even though there's a bunch of uncertainty, even though there's like a bunch of unknowns, because all of that's going to happen. It allows us to be able to show up where we're at whatever season it may be, and to get intentional about in that snapshot of a moment how we want to actually experience it and be in it.
Yeah, and it's so important, as you mentioned. We could fall in an all of nothing mindset, especially with the pressures on and demands on our leadership, our ability to lead, our production, what the company and the market is asking for. And you can get into this mindset, but it's really important to identify if you do have all structure, no flow, all flow, no structure, and whether you have them both. And that's um, so important. Now, there's a comment here that says the dating market is affecting today's business and leadership roles. Only champions will win in today's market. That and I think that has been a kind of an assumption that only the champions win. No, sometimes the underdog wins. Have you seen that? Yeah, and it's a great story, and they say it's a great success story. They came from nothing, and look at where they at.
My challenge would be, what does win even mean?
Exactly.
Right? Like what does win what? What are we winning? And
Right.
that comes back to what is, how are we defining success? Because if we're saying it's the person that, gets the date, or gets the relationship, or gets the promotion, or gets the money, or X, Y, or Z, whatever. If we're saying it's only based on what we are seeing outwardly as the achievement, as the gotten, as the thing that's been grasped, right? We're missing something. Because success is about real success, that success that you feel like free and fulfilled in. It's about an inward experience. And we don't know. None of us really know. If we look at someone else who looks like they're winning or looks like they're successful, we don't know what their inward experience actually is. We don't know. And that's okay, because you know what? Oh, that means they don't know ours either. People don't know all of the inward experiences that other people are going through, regardless of what they see on the outside. They don't know. But we think we do. And then we judge and we compare. And when we judge and we compare, we start shaming and blaming ourselves. We start shaming and blaming someone else, or a combination of the two. And that leads us nowhere fast. That puts us back in that all or nothing thinking, that fight or flight, that division, that conquering, that win or lose attitude, that versus us against them attitude, right? And that is not going to result in that deep, satisfying inward feeling of success.
Yeah, that's and it's power. And I was self-reflecting while you were saying that, because okay, so for instance, on LinkedIn, the platform that I normally am on, there's a lot of sharing, but you can only share but so much, right? Because if you share this, then and you share something else on top of that, that one went away. And so you have to strategically share. And so here in this season of my life, although what people don't see, the loss of family lives over Christmas, before the New Year's, an unexpected, my brother was 44 years old, cardiac arrest before Christmas, and he's gone. And so, those things are what people don't see, right? And all the crying and suffering. But so you post these things. Hey, I got this. Hey, I got that. Well, thank you for this. I appreciate this. And just recently, after about 3 years of this ongoing battle for a trademark for my company, Triad Leadership Solutions, it comes through, right? And USPTO, they don't make a grand thing about it. They just send you an email and there you go, right? You poured your life into this, money, lawyers, all kinds of stuff, and they send you an email, right? so uh, so I get it, and I'm like, wow, okay, all right, I got it. And then later on that day, I was telling my wife, I said, babe, we got the trademark, you know, and and now what? Okay, and okay, it's done. It was done.
Mm-hmm.
3 years of going after this thing was done as soon as I read the email. And I was like, well, that's not what I expected.
Yeah.
It's not what I expected. And
Yeah.
instantly I was reminded. And I'll tell everybody it's God. And that reminder is God for me. So God and the academy.
Mm.
This is just what you needed. The academy is the goal. And so all of a sudden I got happy again. Success, and when we're talking about the reality of the pursuit of success,
Mm-hmm.
if if you're not in the right mind, it doesn't matter how many achievements you get. It doesn't. I mean, I am one, you doctor, Tony, are one that could probably roll out the achievements, right? We could roll it and just watch it go. And I've been fortunate in life to be able to say that. Not everybody that I grew up alongside had that same experience. Maybe theirs was different achievements, but I could roll it out. And if you're not careful as you pursue this thing, the reality may be that it doesn't matter how many of these things you get.
Yeah. It's true because I want so here again we want to be careful that we don't go in an all or nothing mindset, right? Because
Right.
what I'm not saying is that it's bad to celebrate yourself or your achievements, or that it's bad to want to earn more money, or that it's wrong to have goals. I'm not saying that, but I am saying if those are the only measurements of success, if those are the only things you have to accomplish them or else you're a failure, then you are never going to actually deeply, meaningfully, fulfillingly feel successful. The emphasis can't be on those things. Those things, that's the cherry on top. Celebrate them by all means, but they are not the end all be all of what makes you a successful human being living a successful life. They can be a part of the package, the decorations on the outsides, but they are not the fundamental ingredients that make the cake. They are not the fundamental pieces that are required for you to feel it deeply, inwardly, meaningfully. They're additives, and that's okay. They're not bad, they're not wrong, but they can't be the fundamentals. They can't. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work.
That's right. And we had originally started with this word, trauma, right?
Mm.
Trauma. And I really do want to talk about this because I am a product of trauma. And I'll just say I don't mind. I got one life. Yeah, I might as well just say it. Trauma early on in my naval career at the hands of leadership and at this point in my life, it just they didn't know any better. That's just it. And whatever they did know, whether it was good or bad, the way they applied it to me was not in the most positive way. And I'll sum it up that way, right? Because you got to learn how to forgive sometime. And but my trajectory for success was based on that trauma. And I'll tell you that it wasn't healthy. I know that now because it was a me. and that's it. Right? No one else is ever going to do this, and no one else is ever going to do that to me, and I'm going to be the best because I don't ever want to feel that ever again. And I'll tell you that, like I said, we could roll out the accolades, and there was one after another, like a grave that is unsatisfied, right? Biblically, the grave is unsatisfied. uh that's what I became. The successes just were just a grave, and as they were coming, just as fast as they were going, and I almost fell into that with the trademark. So I'm still dealing with that stuff, right? And so trauma and the pursuit of success. Let's talk
Mhm.
about that.
You used, maybe I just heard you use the word and you didn't actually use the word, but what I was hearing you say was protection.
Mhm.
You said I don't want that to happen to me or something like that, not verbatim.
Right. Yeah. This is not going to ever happen to me
Yes.
again. No one's going to do this to me again. Yeah.
So it became a protective measure for you. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If I do all of these things, achieve all of these things, I'll ensure I won't be hurt in that way, or that won't happen to me. It would become a protective measure for you. And that absolutely can happen. I mean, many people have experienced trauma more than what most of us realize. In fact, there was a study done, gosh, I think it was the World Health Organization. And in the United States, it was over 80%, super high number, right? Over 80% of folks that had been exposed to or experienced trauma in their lifetime. So if someone is saying that trauma
Right.
has not affected them or
Mhm.
anyone they know, it's an erroneous assumption. It's just not true. And so trauma has affected each of us in different ways. And there certainly is a spectrum as far as how trauma can be labeled, but still the effects of trauma are the effects of trauma. And if we're not aware that trauma is affecting us, it keeps on affecting us in the background. So for me, I didn't know the first 2 decades of my life that I had created an addiction to action because of traumatic experiences that happened in my life. I didn't know. I did not know. I was just like, you know, I don't fit in. And so if I could just prove myself, prove my worth, show that I can not be a burden and instead be a benefit to people, then maybe I'll feel wanted. Maybe I'll feel accepted a little bit. And it created an addiction to action. And I don't use the word addiction lightly. I was addicted. I could not stop. I had to be doing. I had to be proving. I had to be going. I had to be achieving until I couldn't anymore. Because no matter what I did, no matter how much I did, no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. It was never enough. And the traumas that I experienced were what we call complex traumas. It wasn't one singular trauma that everyone would understand. Oh, yes, that counts as trauma. No. If I were to sit down and tell you my story, maybe you would understand. But if I just kind of said a little bit here and there, you probably wouldn't categorize it as trauma. But I felt unsafe and unsupported, unwanted on a chronic basis in all the spheres of my life. And when you feel that way with no escape, without adequate support, it registers as traumatic. That's what happens. And that does affect how we behave, how we show up, and how we pursue or don't pursue success.
Yeah, and I remember that's powerful. I remember specifically my wife telling me, "You got an issue, bro. you you why do you always?" And she said, "Why do you always need to be first?"
Hmm.
And I tell you, if you look back, and Chris Ayala is on there, a brother of mine from the military, and I was the first in a lot, but that was strategically planted. I mean, when we say strategize, I was a strategist. I was making sure that my journey put me in position to be first. And the funny thing is, at the end of my career, I did not achieve what we in the military call the ultimate goal, right? Which is to become a master chief, which is what the last grade. Uh, and I had all kind of other accolades, and because I didn't get that, it was like it's a missing thing. And now I'll tell everybody here, I ended up being the very first recipient of an award for my whole community. And I did not enjoy that as much as I should have, because I didn't get this thing that was on my strategy list. And this one wasn't, because it was unexpected. It was a very brand new award. And so, in the pursuit of what I thought was success, the real joy was not experienced because I was fixed. We talked about being fixed, right? Too much structure. If you're fixed, all or nothing, and that's where I was.
Yeah. It does that, doesn't it? It because the pressure to pursue this outward success, it makes it very difficult for us to be able to access joy, which is always available for us to access. But how can we access it if it's over here and we're looking over here? Can't. We have to be willing to not have to find this temporary, fleeting satisfaction, the outward things, in order to turn our head and be able to look at the joy of what is, the joy of the small, the joy of the subtle, the joy of the unexpected. There's joy that we can tap into, but not if we're unwilling to turn our head, not if we're only looking. This is the thing. This is the thing. This is the thing.
That's why I love when you said, take an assessment of how you are experiencing your moment, right? This live right now is a huge success. Let me tell you that. Not just because of, Dr. Tony, which she brings her own success, but because we are allowing others, as well as me, because I'm talking about this, right? This is kind of a way of healing myself. But others are able to see maybe some moments in their life, and for the audience out there, I see several on LinkedIn. You got Facebook and YouTube. Please get in there and discuss some of the things, how this discussion is helping you, maybe something you realize, maybe something that came up while you heard some of the comments from Dr. Tony. We would love to hear about that in there. And one comment here: addiction to action. Will Smith said the same thing. That's so interesting, and it could happen.
Yep.
It could happen. My wife said, I'm an overachiever. Well, a lot of it, especially if you're like the first son or the first daughter, the oldest one, right? The one that's supposed to drive the rest of the gaggle of children. In my house, there was between my mom and my dad 11, right? So and I'm the oldest. And so you also have some of those, and we'll talk about that a little, some of the cultural demands on success, because there's a lot of pressure for the firstborns. And in some cultures, especially if you're a firstborn male, and even firstborn female, just as the first, the oldest, there's a lot of pressures in that.
Culture is interesting because there's such an opportunity for us to connect and grow closer together through culture, and then there's also an opportunity to feel excluded. So my experience of culture growing up, my mom is white, my dad is black, both of them are pastors, and I wasn't raised immersed in the black culture. And so I felt on the outskirts. But I was living in an area where it was a fairly diverse area. But a lot of the people on my street just happened to be white. And so I was like, I struggled. I really did. And culture, it was like I wanted in, but it didn't want me. That's how it felt when I was younger. And there's only two of us, me and my sister. My sister's older, I'm the younger one. But my family lived very segmented. So if we were to call it the culture that I was raised in, it was a culture in which you're kind of emotionally separated, which is interesting because, like I said, my parents are pastors. And so there was a community culture in the church that I was very much expected to be a part of, except that churches hated us before we even arrived, before they even knew us, before they even met us, because my mom was a woman pastor. My dad was a black man that married a white woman. They also got divorced. Pastors aren't supposed to get divorced, right? Like all of these things that just didn't fit. And so we were not wanted or liked before we went into the church culture. And so I'm just like, as a kid, it just didn't make sense to me. I'm like, there's these cultures that seem so beautiful, and I want to understand them. I want to be immersed in them, but I feel like I don't know how to. And so for me, it was an exclusionary experience, and not because it was intended, but because I didn't fit in those boxes. And so I think there is the opportunity for us to really use culture to support one another and to come together. And as we do so, to be aware of any boxes that we are creating as we do that, because it can create, in my experience, exclusivity, but in your experience, Enrique, that heightens pressure. All of this is on me as the oldest child. So I think we want to be aware of that, right? What is it to be successful in our culture is another question to ask. This definition of success can be broken down into all these different facets of our lives. It is not just this overarching, what is success for life? It's really, well, how do I feel successful within my culture and embracing my culture and bringing my culture to the world? How do I allow myself to lean into success as a parent, as a mom or dad, as an aunt or uncle? What does success look and feel like for me as a citizen during this time where there's so much division in our world? These are questions we have to ask ourselves, because there's not necessarily a simple singular answer. We've got to dive in and be willing to reflect on it.
Jesse Daniels, they're not identified here, but I can see it on LinkedIn that I'm 100% black from Harlem, and I think you are awesome. Keep going, and we appreciate the support and the comments. Thank you all for joining us today. This topic of success, as you just said, Dr. Tony, is so dynamic, and so you could actually segment this in what the totality of our life is, right? I remember going to an event representing Puerto Ricans, and it's just a proud moment. I was born in Puerto Rico, raised in the Bronx, so for my Harlem folks, and I'll go to an event, and just like you mentioned earlier, I don't feel part. I don't feel part because although my very first language was Spanish and I fluently but in all three aspects, write, read, and speak, can dominate that. Sometimes English, and most times English, is my go-to.
Mhm.
And so I'll feel some type of inadequacy, because I'll hear another person speak, and they sound like the island, right? And if I speak, I sound like I'm not from there, although I was born there. And what does success look like in those times? For me, is it my presence, that just that I showed up, you know that I showed up. The other day, I also went to an event, and I was there, and the Lord reminded me, this is about this person. It's not about you. This is about them, and your presence here is to support them. And
Mhm.
then I was like, you're right. This is the success today, is that I showed up, and I'm supporting my friend. And it's good to have those reflective moments to right side you, right?
Yeah.
um and there's a couple of comments here. Yes, and she's from second of 10 kids, right? Religious, heavy burden. Yeah, and culture and our upbringings also play a role in how we pursue success. But for those out there, please, put your comments in there. We will get to it either in this segment or post segment. And Dr. Tony is very good in answering any questions. So if you have questions on pursuing success or impacts of your life
Mhm.
as you pursue success, we would love to see those in there. Now, Dr. Tony, you wrote a book, and you just mentioned it in your backdrop. Tell us about that, and the work that you're doing now, as well as this podcast venture that you're going into. Wishing you actual success in that. But tell us about that.
Well, it's funny you say that because I have had an aversion to creating a podcast. I don't remember if I told you that or not, Enrique, but I have had a really quite the aversion to it over the years. And it wasn't until a recent season of life that I entered into that it completely changed for me. And it was like, this is the avenue through which you are meant to share some of your mission and your vision to contribute and connect with the world right now. And so it just has been moving along beautifully in the background. It is called Redefining Success with Dr. Tony Warner. So it's very opportune that we're talking about success together. And we have gotten to talk about success together. So I have had my own journey, as we've talked a little bit about some of them today. And in the last episode that I got to do with you, we talked about it too, I think, of wanting to feel successful and mixing that up with looking outwardly successful. And I did achieve a lot. I accomplished a lot. I actually got pregnant when I was a junior in college and became a single mom, and still graduated, on time with honors, went straight into my advanced standing program with my first master's. Later on, went to get a second master's, also obviously got my doctorate. Had my third baby by the time I was 30, finished my PhD by that time too, owned my home, owned my car, all these like, blah, 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 blah. But even after all of that, I didn't feel fulfilled and I didn't feel successful. And that really was a turning point, an unexpected turning point for me, when I had accomplished all the big lofty goals that I had set out for myself in my life and just didn't feel fulfilled. And that's really how the Reset, a High Achiever's Guide to Freedom and Fulfillment, began to be born, was just through my lived experience as I ventured on that unexpected journey. And it has foundational concepts in it that are meant to be customized to you so you can personalize them, because it's just what we were talking about today. It just fits so nicely. It's not cookie cutter. What worked for me isn't necessarily going to work for Enrique, and what worked for Enrique isn't necessarily going to work for someone else, and that's okay. But there are foundational components that we need to keep in mind in order for us to figure out how we want to apply and integrate them into our lives. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, definitely. And the no cookie cutter is just a great example of that. We are unique, folks.
Yeah.
We are unique.
Mhm.
None of us can truly replace any of us. Although corporate will prove that prove that wrong, right? He gone. There's somebody else coming in. But in this life, we are so unique, uh, truly a treasure, right? I hope people understand and can really get this concept of how unique we are. We are singular treasures walking around this earth. And if we could truly just, just look at what we really are, there'd be nothing but love and admiration, right? And we would help each other in all this thing. Um, but in that uniqueness, all these other demands that we feel from the world, whether it's our family, our spouse, our children, our workforce, whatever, government, right? Government has these requirements. uh, you have to be reflective. You have to take the time to reflect, within the confines of all these rules and regulations and norms and customs. How are you showing up, and are you successful that moment? And if you can do that, wow. Well, I definitely gonna practice
Yeah.
that as a recovering achiever. To just based in the moment, learn to appreciate the moment, and analyze how I'm showing up, because it's really important.
Hmm. I used to roll my eyes at cliche statements, but they all land differently now. I'll tell you, like after the healing journey and the self exploration I have gone on these past several years, and one of them kept coming up as you're speaking. It's variety is the spice of life. And if you
Mhm.
think about it, I know it's a cliche statement. I know, cliche statements they get kind of dulled out. But if we could just consider that just for a moment, who wants to, for example, eat bland food forever? No, you need the variety of the seasonings, right? To amplify the enjoyment, to amplify the experience, right? Who wants to actually, I know sometimes we think we want this, but who actually would want to have their life be like smooth and unchanging forever? Just
Mundane.
that, just forever. It first of all gets boring, but you grow stagnant and there's no growth. There's no excitement. The enjoyment that maybe was in the beginning fades off because it's just all the same. No, we need the variety. We need the variety in professions. As professionals, who can actually run a multi-million dollar business all on their own? Just them, no one else, singularly. We can't. We need the variety of individuals and their skills and their influence and their interactions in order to help it thrive. Variety really is the spice of life. And when we poo-poo it or push against it, it really is not in our best interest. It really actually works against us.
Absolutely. Now, folks, we have had a great 56 minutes of talk here. Dr. Tony, please share how they can get a hold of you. Share maybe and we'll make sure to add into the comments the links to her podcast, the links to her book, her website. But how can they get a hold of you if they want to engage in a conversation or your practice?
I'd say the best way to check me out would be one of two ways. If you're on YouTube, hop over to YouTube. That's where the podcast will primarily be housed, although it, of course, will be on the other platforms as well. It's going to air in the spring, but the trailer is there now, so you can subscribe, and that way you'll get notifications when episodes like Enrique's come up in the spring for you to check out on the podcast. And if you're not into YouTube or anything like that, you can go to the other platforms. But StreamYard.com is my website. It's kind of the hub, has different ways to connect, free resources, a place to submit questions if you want to submit questions anonymously for me to check out and answer, and a whole bunch of other things there too. So that's a good place to connect.
All right, folks. Well, you got that. And also on LinkedIn. Find her on LinkedIn. If you're watching the live stream there, make sure to connect with her. Send her a request. Send her a request. It's the professional thing to do, but connect with her either way and follow her on YouTube. It would be great to see you there. Now, folks, we are at the end of our segment. Aloha Friday Live continues in 2024. And I just want to remind everybody that we are on the hunt for 600 subscribers on DTLW Podcast. So if you go to YouTube at DTLW Podcast, you'll see the channel. Subscribe there and help us get there. I believe we're about 40 something from that goal. We would love to have you with us. And we are also streaming live on Parade Deck. So if you venture on there, Parade Deck is a military group that of creators and content creators that are amassing on the Parade Deck. And if you've been in the military, you know what that means. But you can follow me there by going to follow 731, and we would like to see you there in support. But today has been Dr. Tony Warner. I love the content. I love the topic of the success. I'm wishing all of that for you this year. Aloha Friday Live. Mahalo, everybody, for being with us. And we'll see you next week.